Hello and welcome to BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Sydney Bowles. In September 2022, 49 migrants arrived unexpectedly on Martha's Vineyard, signaling the start of a new level of crisis in Massachusetts' migrant shelter system. Throughout 2023, the news piled up: a cap on the Commonwealth's unique right to shelter law, more immigrant families housed in hotels awaiting working permits, families arriving without proper clothes, no food, and communities rallying to support them. In this episode of BNews In Depth, we talk with State Representative Ken Gordon, who's been focusing on this issue locally and in state government. But first, Rabbi Susan Abramson of Burlington's Temple Shalom Emeth heard about the news of migrants in our area and jumped into action, working to amass donations to make our new neighbors feel at home. I started by asking her what made her want to get involved in this issue.
Jews have been wandering for thousands of years from country to country, and my ancestors, my grandparents came to this country from Europe, and so we know how we were treated, and so I really feel called or motivated to help other immigrants like my family feel welcomed into this country, which is supposed to be a land where we accept all people, as it says on the Statue of Liberty. So I feel, as a Jew in particular, it's so important for us to do everything we can to welcome new guests and friends into our communities.
How did you learn that this new group of people was here in our region?
So our state representative, Ken Gordon, informed me that a group of immigrants had ended up at Bedford Plaza Hotel in Bedford, and I had also heard from the Interfaith Clergy Group in Billerica that a group of immigrants were similarly placed at Homewood Suites in Billerica. So I immediately ran over there to see what they needed, and I started a clothing drive for both groups.
I mean, it seems kind of like an emergency. I mean, these were folks who were arriving with nothing, sometimes with no shoes, no change of clothes. I mean, how do you begin to figure out what the needs are and figure out how to meet those needs?
Right. So I went over and kind of met with, just like got a sense of who they were, and there were already people overseeing them in both locations. There was this amazing woman in Billerica who is a volunteer for the food pantry in Billerica, who just adopted all of these families and took total control of them. And so she knew very specifically what each family needed from the very beginning. And similarly in Bedford, the town administrator, or the head of health and human services, took on that role. And so I went over and I saw that they had nothing. So I immediately organized a clothing drive for both locations, and I had my neighbors bringing over clothes for children of all sizes and adults, and people in our temple community donated a lot of clothes, and so that was the first thing that we saw that they needed. Plus, I really felt when I went over there that the children had absolutely nothing. They had no toys, no nothing, and so I just felt like the thing that they should have, the first and foremost, are stuffed animals, so that they could feel like they had something that they could feel supported by. So fortunately, one of my neighbors had these huge boxes of stuffed animals, and I got a box from someplace else as well, and we brought them over, and I walked in and started to give them out to the children, and just the look on their faces was just amazing. For young, a 2, 3, 4-year-old or infants, toddlers who had nothing, to just have like a stuffed animal, it was so moving to see. But then, as I started to walk through the hallway there, the adults found out that somebody was coming through with a box of stuffed animals, and they started running over and grabbing like handfuls of stuffed animals. So before I knew it, they were all gone, which I was happy about, but I just saw the desperation in their eyes, that they had nothing, and they were in a strange place, a strange location. They didn't know what was going to happen to them or their children, and so there was this need, and I think it was probably similar during the Depression, when nobody had food or anything. You have to try to grab what you can when you can for your own family. So I just really saw that sense of desperation, but the first thing that they needed were just basic clothing, basic needs. I also brought over huge boxes of diapers, which were also gone in 2 seconds because people were grabbing them for their babies. So there was so much that they needed, but those are the first set of needs that we took care of.
What did you learn about the circumstances of their lives, where they had come from, the kinds of situations that they had maybe left behind or encountered on their journeys that led them to be here in our communities?
Well, so the first stumbling block is that none of them speak English. They all speak Spanish. Some of them speak French.
Haitian Creole, maybe.
Haitian Creole was a big one. So I don't speak. I mean, I speak a little bit of French and but no Spanish, no Haitian Creole. So it was really impossible to communicate with them, and I was kind of led to believe that maybe it was best not to ask them about their stories, to bring up traumatic experiences, but I think first and foremost, everybody feels so desperate. They don't want to sit there and talk about their stories. That they just want to get, when they see somebody like me, a privileged person walking in from the community, they don't want to sit there and talk to me. They want to get what they need from me. So these three women, when I was walking through the corridor there, kind of grabbed me and said, can you sit with us? And they had like this little cell phone, and they had Google Translate on it. So they were asking me to if could I get this for their children, that for their children, and so that's their total focus. And we think from our position like oh, it'd be nice to hear about their stories and all of that, but they're not in the position to even want to. They're not there. Like they're just like in a horrible hole of where they're at in their lives right now.
I want to ask a really difficult question. This is a topic that is really fraught in our community, and I think there's a sense of scarcity, maybe, of resources that these new members of our community might be using, and words get thrown around that I think are really scary and really harmful. Words like invasion. I wonder if you have a response to that fear, that sense of scarcity, because I think it's a really it's a really difficult topic to face, and it's a really fraught issue even here. And I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to ask? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I look at it the opposite way. I hope the people who are scared of people who are coming into the community or feel like they're taking something away from them, I hope that they can see the complete opposite side of it, which is that their being in our communities has brought out the best in a lot of us. It's brought out the generosity. I can't tell, when I put out an email to my large neighborhood saying that I needed like clothes, diapers, wipes, like all these things, within minutes people were calling me, texting me, emailing me, like can I bring this, can I bring that? My entire garage, as I think you saw, was full of stuff just from my neighbors, because they wanted to help, because they understood that we're all human, we all have a right to be here, we all have needs, and they understand their privilege, so it's brought out the generosity in so many people. I actually had way too much to bring because people were being so generous, and I wanted to give people, and people were actually getting mad at me because I wasn't telling them what else they could bring, and people were, I raised, believe it or not, $1,700 within 5 days of putting out this call, and people so one person sent me $1,000, somebody who doesn't live in this area at all, and just said, like, I understand what this feels like. I now have the money. Please use it for them, to buy them whatever they need. So I feel like we need to look at our generous side, and nothing's being taken away from anybody else. As a matter of fact, we have such a huge shortage of workers in our communities, and so the goal is to get all of these people job permits so that they can join the workforce and fill all those jobs, which, in restaurants and assisted living situations, like all kinds of places where there's a scarcity of help, and it's not a scarcity of resources, it's a scarcity of help, and so now all of the things that we enjoy and people who need more help, we who need more help, are going to be getting it from these new arrivals.
What advice do you have for individuals, for organizations who are touched by this issue and might want to learn more or get involved in their own ways?
Well, so it's a constantly evolving situation, because so the state is controlling larger groups of immigrants in different towns. For example, Bedford happens to be the largest community that does not have a state-sponsored overseer of what's happening there. They're up to 365 people in the Bedford Plaza Hotel. So the needs change, and so I would suggest reaching out to maybe the Health and Human Services director in a town to find out what the needs are, or State Representative Gordon. He might know, but for example, the Billerica people just are today being moved out of Billerica. All of them are being moved out of Billerica to another location. So sometimes, people move out, people find another place to live. Oversight of different places changes. So it's really hard to know. But the best thing is to just watch the news to see where what the exact need is. And also, just if you see somebody who looks lost, this is the most important thing, I think. If you see somebody in a supermarket who looks lost, or they're having trouble and they clearly don't understand the language, help them. Just be a friendly face. You when in the 1980s, I resettled a number of families from the former Soviet Union, and they didn't know what our supermarkets were like. They were completely lost, and one of my favorite things to do was to bring these brand new families through a supermarket and just show them things. And so I think we need to be a friend, and we need to be an ally of our new neighbors.
Rabbi Susan Abramson, thank you very, very much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Beyond Burlington, leaders in state government have been working hard to help newcomers and towns that are helping accept them. Burlington State Representative Ken Gordon is among them, and he joined me to talk about the bigger picture. I started by asking, how are his colleagues talking and thinking about this on Beacon Hill?
Yeah, so we have been talking about how we're dealing with the response to the tremendous number compared to in the past, of migrant people coming in to Massachusetts. And we know the situation has occurred because, as you said, we have a right to shelter law for families with children. It only pertains to families with children. And we're the only state that has such a law. And we're proud of that law, because when people from Massachusetts fall through the cracks, need shelter, at least as a fallback position, they have some place to go. And all of us as state representatives have had urgent calls from someone who says, I've lost my shelter. My family and I, for example, I may be living with someone, I have children, I've been kicked out. Where can I go? And we have some place for them to go. So we're really loath to change the law. That would be a long process. But just philosophically, it's there to protect families, and it was presupposed largely families here, but it pertains to any family. We don't make a value decision of what family qualifies. You're here.
Right. So recently, a couple months ago, Governor Maura Healey kind of put a cap on that at 7,500 families, basically saying, we want to help as much as we can, but there has to be a limit on how much we can do. What did it feel like for you to get that news that suddenly there's a limit on this program?
To be perfectly honest with you with that, it's frustrating. I understand it because we have only so much money, but I really have been working and questioning the use of money that has been sent to the administration, whether it's used most productively. Because it's one thing to say we need more money, it's another thing to make sure that we spend the money that's being sent to the administration wisely. And I really do have an issue with that.
Say more about that. What are you satisfied with, and what do you think could be done differently?
Well, I think, so when this when these migrant people came in, first of all, they're legal. They're legally here. They report at the border. They're now entitled to a process, and the process takes too long. I'm giving you a lot of sort of value, good and bad things, and I'm sorry about that, but it's frustrating because we need immigration reform on the federal level. We've been waiting for that for decades. It's not one administration's fault or problem. It's the inability of any federal government.
Right. This has been a decades-long conversation.
Yeah. And so because of that, people who are migrant, who report in, now they're entitled to a hearing. That takes a long time. So what do you do? In the meanwhile, and what Texas has done is sent them to where they could, because they don't want to have a glut of people all in one place. So Massachusetts is a place they can send because they know we have this law. In any case, so we have this influx of people coming in quickly, and the administration at first is saying we've got to house families with children wherever we can. And so they're making decisions as to this is what we'll pay for a room in a motel. And it's by and large been about $200. There may be some exceptions, but what I'm
Pretty
aware
nice hotel room. I wouldn't spend $200 a night on a hotel room.
Well, so the question there is that they go to hotel rooms. Who will take that? There are some hotels that that say no. We charge more, and we have a business model that isn't consistent with what the state wants to do. So it's an arrangement between the hotel and the state, really. But there are places that would say that that's more than I'm used to getting, and I'll take it. And I'm frustrated that we couldn't have the time to be able to look into how much more than the average daily room rate that's actually paid, not the one that's advertised on the back of the door when you shut the door and you say, oh man, look at what it says is the maximum room rate. And none of us pay that, right? So I think that they were under pressure to get people housed, and so they paid sometimes more than what a hotel was actually getting.
Right.
Through a contract or through other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think my mind is going in a couple different directions. One of which is I was reading in the news recently. This was a WBUR piece on the sort of the consequences of this funky economics that arises when the state is coming to hotels in this way, where sometimes longtime tenants of hotels are finding that the hotels are charging more, or that they've been displaced to house these other groups with state backing. But then I think that creates this this conversation about who deserves to be here. And I think something that I've been wrestling with in this conversation is the words that we use about cost and burden when we're talking about people. I think it can be really dehumanizing to talk about groups of people as a burden that they're placing on communities or on the state. I wonder if you think about that, if you want to complicate my understanding, or if you wrestle with that too.
Well, first of all, I think we all wrestle with it. But I also come to a place where people have come to work. And here in Massachusetts, we have a labor shortage. We need people who are willing to work. And I know of people in Bedford, for example, next town over, where we have 94 families, and there are people who have walked over to the DPW, seen a sign that says we need help, and they knock on the door and say we want to help, and we'll do it. We'll fill these openings that otherwise these businesses can't find somebody to fill. The problem is the federal government has been slow in giving work authorization to the people, so they can't do it. And they didn't come here to be in a single hotel room with children and all to be crowded into a hotel. They came here in part to work. And that's been, in the past couple of weeks, there's been work authorizations that have been issued, so that's getting better. And I think that as that flow starts, we'll see this situation ease much more because they'll work their way out of the hotel, motel situation. They'll also find other families that are from the countries they're coming from. Mostly it's from Haiti, but they'll find, places in the Haitian community. Now they'll have a little bit of money and they can afford to go somewhere. I think that's gonna help. So your question is, when you're looking at people coming in, you know what? We have a benefit too, because people coming in can help our economy in the short term. We need them. We have low unemployment right now. We have a labor shortage right now. So, we don't have to look at this as a net burden, and I don't at all.
we can see this as like, what are the barriers to accessing the value that we can share in from having new members in our community? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, sort of the natural progression of things is people are coming here, they're getting shelter. The only choice they have really
Right.
is what the state is providing for them. If they can get to work over time, they'll reach out to their community. Maybe there's a relative here, a distant relative, someone they've heard of, and they'll call, and that's the natural sort of migration of, natural progression
Yeah.
of migrants.
Yeah.
That's what my family did, right? They landed on our shores, and they find some place to go in common with their culture. Again, the hotel and motel situation isn't their last stop.
Right.
They don't want it to be, we don't intend it to be.
Right.
But when there's a lot of people all at once, it ends up causing that situation.
Right. So we started at the level of the state. We started in Beacon Hill. I want to come back to your district. You've been pretty involved in what's going on locally. And I will say we're a Burlington TV channel, but your district includes more towns than Burlington. So I want you to feel free to bring in other communities that you represent. Give me the lay of the land. What's going on in your district, and be as specific as you feel like you can be.
Well, so overall, we have two types of shelters right now. We have supported shelters, state-supported shelters, and we have now sort of these runover or spillover shelters, right? So the state-supported shelters had housed people who are transitional in nature, people who need the housing, before this crisis came in, and there was state support there. That filled up quickly. So here in Burlington, we have a supported shelter, and that's why I don't hear much from Burlington residents about its effect on the town directly. I'm not saying it doesn't, and certainly the cost statewide affects all of us directly, but within the border, that's why I don't. But Bedford, on the other hand, where, as you said, I also represent, has a motel with an owner who is willing to accept migrants. They have 100 rooms in their hotel, and they have 94 with migrant residents now.
So essentially, it's almost entirely devoted to this purpose.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right. And one thing that you said was it's not in the rules prevent people in hotels from essentially evicting families that have been there long term, but I'm not saying that doesn't happen. That's really unfortunate. It shouldn't happen. But we know that the reality of the situation is sometimes it has, and I'd work against that. If a constituent came to me and told me that situation, I'd work to get them back in. But I don't dispute what you're saying. I think that's happening. It's
And
not
to be clear,
supposed
that wasn't local. That was
Yeah.
I don't recall the community, but it wasn't local.
Yeah, and I'm not saying, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to happen. So I've been working in, Bedford's not a supported shelter, so it started off with where people came in, and the police were finding out that there were families here. That's how the town knew, and that's how I knew. The state would say, well, we're sort of drinking out of a fire hose. We tried. In fact, that's what they did say. Okay, let's give them that, because at that time, people really were coming into Massachusetts unannounced, and they were doing everything they could, right? At this point, things have changed. We can expect the people, not necessarily the number, but we at least know we're in the middle of this situation. So what I've been trying to do, especially in Bedford, is create efficiency so that we're using money wisely. That's what I started off by saying. And that's why this frustrates me. So for example, the food, the meal, so the state supplies 2 meals a day, and the motel supplies breakfast. So the state supplies 2 meals a day. The people living there are getting meals that are not consistent with their culture. Little kids are being fed things like buffalo chicken fingers, right? My son, when he was little, would never eat. He'd say spicy. He'd reject it, right? And we found a place that will provide appropriate meals. We're trying to get the state to shift those expenses, because if the kids aren't eating it, it's wasted money. And the state agrees. They're not saying no. We're trying to get it to actually happen. So that's I think one of the major efforts I've been trying to do.
Is it unusual for you to be this intimately involved with day-to-day life for people in your community, with what people in your community are having for lunch? Or is that the job?
I think that's the job. It's funny that you asked that because I actually bought a few, ordered and bought a few meals so that I know what I was talking about, right? But that's, the job of the state rep, as far as state government, we get to touch. We get to talk to people. I have office hours. Anybody can come and talk to me. The number of people, as you say, I have 2 towns plus 1 precinct in Lexington. So the district is small enough that I think that part of our job is to work with individuals with problems. So when we were in the pandemic and we had problems with unemployment, we had hundreds of people calling our office because that was an inefficient time for getting benefits. So many people needed it. So I think it is part, I look at that maybe because I was just new to politics altogether when I started as state rep in 2013 was when I was sworn in. And I'm just going to treat it as an opportunity to help people. And I hope I always have.
Were there people that you met who you could talk to? I understand there's a language barrier, so the answer might be no, and that's okay. But were there people that you met through this work whose stories touched you in some way, or anything that you learned about individuals that just hit you?
Oh, yeah. And the language barrier is reduced because there are some people who speak English. And then we've had great help from the National Guard. We've had individual Guards people who have come in. Some of them speak Haitian Creole. And so we've been able to talk to people. And yeah, so they're hard workers. They were living in a situation that couldn't continue for them. And they took the initiative to leave. And that's a decision that you don't take lightly. I mean, you think about how hard that decision is to leave people behind and take your family, and most of these people that we're dealing with have little kids.
Yeah.
You take your little kids and you're looking for opportunity. And I can relate to that because my great-grandparents came from Eastern Europe for that same reason. The immigration situation was different. We didn't have quotas at that time. There wasn't the same type of weight. But they got here, and there were people in our country that thought, well, you're taking an opportunity from me. That's classic. That happens all the time. That go back to the migrant story. That's what happens. And then they assimilate and work and support their family and move from smaller, type of neighborhoods to move on.
Yeah.
And that happens. It's
and
happened to all
become a part of the fabric of communities of a country.
And that's,
in that way.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that makes us a great country, because all these people, including I'm sure your family, my great-grandparents, they came here because they wanted to take that initiative. They came here to work. They weren't lazy. The lazy people don't migrate. They don't pick up and uproot everybody and come in. These are the people that want to contribute. And that's why we're a country made of contributors, made from contributors, and that's why we are who we are.
So we started this conversation at Beacon Hill. We dipped our toe into our district here in Burlington, your district, and I want to sort of zoom back out a little bit, head back up to the state level.
Yep.
There has been a lot of reporting lately about the money, recent money stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong, the legislature provided $250 million to fund programs related to migration, to migrant communities, migrant crisis. Right. Governor Maura Healey says we may need $900 million in the next fiscal year to address this crisis. And at the same time, there's new reporting that because we haven't collected as much revenue as we expected, we may be facing $375 million in mid-year spending cuts imminently. That's a lot of numbers, but it kind of stresses we're tightening our belts statewide and we're facing this new spend. How do we square that circle?
Well, there's a lot of work to do. And I can't give you an easy answer to a difficult question, because you're right about all the facts that you said. We did appropriate, we gave the governor $250 million. The House and eventually the legislature tied strings to that, consistent with what I've been telling you. It's got to be spent wisely, and we want to know how it's being spent. She does want more money. Whether she gets that is a question yet to be answered, right? Part of it is she may not need that much if the people are, again, entitled to get work authorization and work their way through and out of the motel system, and that will help. So I'm still not convinced that the problem is going to get to that level.
Okay.
But you're right that our collection has been less than what we projected it would be at that time for various reasons. And so we're looking, and the governor just this week cut certain local programs, not in Burlington and also not in Bedford, but certain were cut in half under her authority, under what we call Rule 9C. So yeah, now we've got to look at this as sort of a value question, because I think it's a fair question where we're being put to an expense with respect to people who are coming here from other countries, and we don't have enough money to fill the budget that we passed last summer. Those two things are true, but it may be that we look at it and we see people, and we see that we can help people, and we see they can eventually help us. So from a value standpoint, you know, what choices can we make? I don't want to see kids sleeping in Boston Common. I don't think anybody watching this wants to see that happen, and so we've got to do what we can.
Is there a chance that we see the repeal or the significant altering of the right to shelter law?
You know, I don't think that there's much of an appetite to do that, because it's a law that protects our residents, our long-term residents, and has for a long time. And if we do that, it's going to change for everybody. It's going to start whittling away for everybody. And this is a short-term crisis. Pretty soon we'll look back on it, and I think we'll see that we welcomed a lot of people that are helping our community when we look back on it. But I don't see it. I don't myself see much of a change to that law.
Okay. State Representative Ken Gordon, we've covered a lot of ground here, both locally and statewide. Are there other pieces of this that you think I'd miss, or any other closing thoughts that you want to leave anyone watching, community members, with on this issue?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate you asking all these questions, and you're doing a great job. Your cat does a great job. No, I'm solely serious, because people need to know from a direct level of what's going on in a complicated way. And so to take the time to do a whole program on this topic, I think is important, because if you just read the headlines, there's a misunderstanding that can come with that. It requires some level of detailed analysis, and you're doing that.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming in. Yeah.
Thank you. So, no, we are trying our best to figure out answers to difficult questions. And we've got competing values. We've got competing points of view, and we are considering all those points of view. And even if people don't agree, it doesn't mean their opinions aren't unreasonable. And this is an issue where you could have points of view that really we have to reach a compromise and come up with a solution to. And I think it's within our grasp. And as I have said a couple times, I think it's within our grasp, because I think the people coming to Massachusetts are coming here with the ability to help and the willingness to help all of us to become a better community. I think that's going to happen.
State Rep Ken Gordon, thank you again for joining. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Appreciate it.
This has been another episode of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Sydney Bowles. Thanks for watching.